Chapter 22 The Trial of Paxsura, Part 1. Paxsura, Thoughts. So that my day has come, the day where I am to be judged for everything I have done, whether my legacy in life be one of scorn or tragedy. Either way, if I am to be declared innocent, there's no getting past knowing what I did was not right. And if I am to be convicted, I only pray you have mercy on me, because afterwards, I will see you soon. The warden marches down the cell block to Paxsura's cell and unlocks it, providing Paxsura with some dignified clothing.
Warden: Paxsura, you are hereby released from prison to attend your own trial, where a jury of your peers will decide your fate. I only hope it lives up to the life you have lived.
Thomas Wright then shows up with his case files along with Father Seraphim. Thomas: Well, Mrs. Lansaro, you know what day it is, and I am fully prepared to plead your case. It seems you've made some friends along the way, because this Christian priest thinks you're worth redeeming. He already tells me how much you've done for the people you once considered your enemies, within your own queendom. Not that it will mean anything in the royal court, but maybe the god of the Zolshuans will spare you in some way for it. And in an unlikely scenario you do get convicted, I'm going to be one hell of a surprise when there's no assets for the prosecution to seize except a single spoon. You've always had that sort of comedy, didn't you?
Paxsura: Well, whatever happens to me, I will be prepared for it.
May 11th, 2101, 09:32 hours. Royal Court of Lansaro. As it was the morning of that day, the sun shone on the halls of justice, to which Paxsura was to be tried in all its white marble majesty. And outside the courthouse stood all manner of people, spectators, Selenese army, journalists. Name it, and they were there with all manner of chattering and DSLR camera clicks, to have the trial broadcasted for the entire world watching to see. And once Paxsura had entered the courtroom, she stood before the judge and the jury of her peers, 3 from each province representing her peers as the entire domain of her queendom. She was then seated in the defendant's chair with her attorney, and on the other side of the room stood the prosecutor, Mr. Ellington, with Umbrio leading the prosecution's case. And after everyone is in their positions, the judge spoke.
Today marks the beginning of Queen Paxsura's trial for the crimes of which she has been accused. All defendants are innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of her peers. The prosecution may make its opening statement.
Ellington then said,
Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution intends to prove beyond a reasonable doubt Queen Paxsura was guilty of attempted first-degree murder of a relative of the royal family, multiple counts of bribery and corruption, sacrilege to the pantheon, and treasonous acts against the queendom.
The judge then said, The defense may make its opening statement. Thomas then said, The defense intends to prove that Paxsura's actions on May 11th, 2100, were part of a preeminent self-defense and a failure of the royal guard to fulfill its duties, as well as her charges of treason, bribery, corruption, and sacrilege are false charges made by her political adversaries. The judge then said, The prosecution may call its first witness. And after the judge said those words, the prosecution called Captain Cyrus of the Royal Guard to testify. Ellington then said, Please state your name and occupation. Captain Cyrus then said, My name is Cyrus, and I have served as the captain of the Royal Guard for 10 years. Cyrus, tell us about what happened on May 11th and the events surrounding and leading up to the shootout between the defendant and Jeremiah Johnson. In their chronological order as I have witnessed them, I was fulfilling my duties overseeing the palace security and maintaining the protection of the royal family from all known potential threats. This includes but was not limited to agents of various other political leaders and making sure food and drinks had not been contaminated. However,
something was different about Paxsura that day. She was paranoid about someone, so I had those under my command look into it. Yet we could not find anything on him other than he was a relative of Her Majesty Queen Ariana. Yet Paxsura had a warrant illegally signed for his execution without trial nor crime committed. Therefore, we had no cause in which to arrest him. However, a few hours later, Paxsura and her relatives had weapons concealed on their persons and attempted to commit first-degree murder on Jeremiah Johnson in what was clearly a premeditated act. I then ordered my rural guard to be ready in case conflict escalated, which it never did, and that's when I ordered my rural guard to arrest Jeremiah to investigate, then to be overruled by Umbriel's imperial pardon. In a normal circumstance, this would be very out of the ordinary, but this was clearly an act of self-defense that had the potential to start a civil war or foreign war because of Paxsura's actions, hence why the imperial pardon was issued and Queen Ariana coronated immediately as her successor. Cyrus then finished his testimony, and the judge said, "The defense may now cross-examine the witness." Thomas then stood up to face the witness and asked, "Captain Cyrus, I assume you're someone who takes your role as leader of the Royal Guard seriously to the highest vigilance. So I have a couple of questions regarding what you said about looking into the shooter's background. What were you able to gather on him and his relationship with Paxsura? We found that he's a half-brother to Her Majesty and he's ethnically Zolsharan, and raised American along with Queen Ariana. Beyond that, everything else I know is hearsay." "Were you aware of him bringing weapons into the palace courtyard before he shot Queen Paxsura?" "No." "Did the royal guard screen Jeremiah before he entered without an invitation?" "No." "Why was Jeremiah not screened for an unauthorized possession of firearms on palace grounds or charged with felony trespass with a firearm?" Given his status as the Queen's half-brother, weapon laws that are binding upon the commoners, restricting access to firearms beyond muzzleloaders and black powder revolvers do not apply. And given his status as the Queen's half-brother, it's his palace as much as hers by her own decree. Then, before asking another question, Thomas grabbed his case files from the evidence regarding the illegal bounty on Paxsura's head and said, "Were you aware of the illegal bounty on Paxsura's head and refused to act?" But before Cyrus could answer, Ellington said, "Objection! The matters of a criminal case in a foreign country are irrelevant to the case at hand." The judge then said, "Objection overruled. The court has already accepted these case files as evidence." Cyrus then answered, "We were not aware of it until after the Zolsharan government contacted us after the event occurred, and the person responsible for that illegal bounty was held accountable, in accordance with the Inu Convention. They told us the bounty was clearly done by rogue elements within the Zolsharan Bounty Hunter Guild, and not by any of the higher-ups of the guild without their knowledge." Thomas then faced the jury. "It appears that the Royal Guard failed to fulfill its duties to properly protect Queen Ariana. The defense is done cross-examining the witness." A master and an apprentice. Meanwhile, Titani was watching the trial broadcast instead of doing her schoolwork, as Dr. Kitsune came in saying, "Aren't you supposed to be doing your schoolwork?" Titani then flustered her wings. "Why are you always pestering me about my schoolwork? I don't get any of this stuff, and where am I even going to use this?" Victor then stood there and gently said, "Perhaps we can do something else. Tell me, what is it you want to do right now so we can go do it?" Titani then blanked out and said, "I'm not really sure. It's like asking me that question made me forget everything I've ever done." Victor then sat down, spreading his 9 tails, and said, "Perhaps we can continue doing what we're already doing and just talk. But first, would you mind putting that schoolbook away, please?" Titani then stared into Victor's foxy fluorescent cyan eyes, at first with excitement, then with suspicion, and asked, "Where is this going?" Victor then stood up. "Only to the courtyard with something to eat in our hands and paws." Victor then reached into his magical pockets and grabbed some vegetables and bread and cut up some rabbit with the bowie knife Buck gifted him and took a bite.
Victor's tails then glowed slightly as he put his bread and bowie knife back into his magic pockets, for safekeeping. Victor then handed Titania some turkey sausage and said, "Nothing quite like a rabbit and a sugary drink after not eating meat for 40 days. I've always preferred it over fried tofu and sake anyway." Titania then took a bite from her sausage and asked, "Why is that?" Even though it doesn't mean much outside the Kitsune clan, fried tofu reminds me too much of Inari's cooking when she used to make it all the time. Needless to say, my sister is not a very good cook. And as for sake, I just find it taste horrendous. But what about you? Any particular food you don't like? I haven't really been picky about my food unless it's something that made me sick. But today sure is beautiful. It is. Victor and Titania then just sort of looked at each other in silence while taking a seat under a tree. And while sitting there, Titania looked through the rays of sunlight through the leaves, listening to the birds tweet and as the wind rustle. Titania then sat there, taking it all in as the worries in her heart began to silence themselves, with only the sounds being of the wind and animals. That was until she heard Victor take off his necklace and whisper something in each time his paw hand moved one position on the chain of 50 black knots. And although she could not understand what he was speaking, she looked over to him as he whispered her name on the last knot in a language she didn't understand. She then asked, "What was it that you were whispering?" Victor then put his necklace back on, tucking it into his kitsune garb. It's an ancient Ceylonese devotion saying, "Ki yesu masha zan ki deki, mes mi ki sarete." Normally there are 33 knots, but I have a lot of floof on mine, so mine has 50 to get all the way around my neck. You are right about the floof part. You almost have as much floof as Natalia's tail. But I get the feeling you had me come out here and sit in silence to teach me something else. What was it you were trying to teach me? Victor then turned to face Titania. You're a perceptive one, aren't you? I came to teach you the importance of silence, contemplation, and temporary disconnecting from the chaos of the world, and being totally present with the Lord. Something I could not teach you while under your father's thumb. Titania then tilted her head and raised her hands. Why are you teaching me this, out of all things? Shouldn't I be going to the world doing so many good things for people? One must understand first that going into the world takes energy, and unlike God, we are susceptible to fatigue and failure. And our minds and spirits need restoration, and not just our bodies. You can be as physically strong as your companions Sylvia and Agron, but should your mind and spirit be weak, that strong body will serve you no good. Or if your mind is as sharp as a 1,000-year-old nine-tailed kitsune of legend, and faith to move mountains, yet your body is weak, you will be of little power to make much use of it. And even beyond that, it is impossible to do anything unless you first synergize with God's grace, hence the importance of pure prayer from the heart, without distractions. Though it will require patience and effort, the virtue gained through synergizing with God's grace will far surpass anything that can be done through passion and natural strength alone. Such is why I guided you through the practice of self-control and examination of conscience, in order to enable you to become the fullest version of yourself, beyond what is merely capable through passion and emotion alone. And even though passion for Christ and emotion are good things, they can only get us so far. Now I understand why you did all that stuff with Natalia's approval. You were trying to help me get on the right track in life. That's one way to see it. But I was only doing what I was supposed to, and should have done so sooner. I'm also trying to find ways to work around the terrible schooling system to help you grow into a truly virtuous person, while still enabling you to pass your classes. And I think you have been. I honestly understand what I'm learning much better with your help. Although I still don't understand when I'm going to ever use geometry or algebra. Who knows? There are many places the future holds for you. Meanwhile, Buck was watching the two after taking a break from playing Persona 5, as his persona and thinking, You know what? There's nothing wrong with being a furry. If that nine-tails can walk around looking naturally like someone's persona, I can be a furry too. Edenthiel and Natalia. While Edenthiel was contemplating how she might save her husband from Versifeth, she plotted leaving the palace and remembering the powerful magic she was gifted with, and started leaving Lunsaro Palace until Natalia noticed her and asked, "Where do you think you're going?" Of course, Edenthiel was a terrible liar and said, "Getting some fresh air outside." "By walking out of the front door in the middle of the night, darling, I don't need your heart sense to know that's not really what's on your mind. So why are you really leaving?" "If you promise to keep this a secret, I'll tell you. Do you promise?" "Tell me, and I'll decide whether or not I should notify Ari and let you go by yourself." "Fine. I'll leave him to save my husband after I abandoned him to Versifeth. Now she's taken him prisoner, and Umbriel's too long, even though it's only been a day. I can't stand waiting while she does who knows what to him while in prison. He came to save me, and it's only right I try to save him as his wife. And I have the magical power to do it." "I know you do, but I doubt little pudgy cinnamon roll you consider to the royal guard or even put up a proper fight. If you're going to try to break Jeremiah out of Versifeth's prison, I'm going with you." The two then heard Queen Aubriana say, "No, you will not. I will not allow my sister-in-law to be taken prisoner again, nor put my childhood friends in harm's way." Natalia then looked to see that it was Ariana who said that before backtalking. "And what do you do to try to stop us?" The royal guard then stepped out of the shadows with their weapons. "I could keep you prisoner and prevent you from ever leaving my palace forever." Natalia then took at her surroundings and said, "You have a point. Then again, I could make a good prisoner with how much I love bread and water." Ariana then struggled to keep her composure as she said, "Natalia, with all I'm going through, please don't push it. I've already lost my brother to being held captive by Versifeth, and I don't want her to take you and Edenthiel also. Please, just stay here while I have the royal guard take care of it." Natalia then stepped towards Ariana with her digileg foot and asked, "Since when did the royal guard do anything about Edenthiel, after she's been captured for months? I care about him too, and you're not the only one here who does." Captain Cyrus then said, "Your Majesty, I advise you let them go. It's better they do it than the royal guard avoiding unnecessary conflict. Plus, that ringtail and the training and resources needed to get your brother back. Retrieval of your brother against some royal guards not trained against ringtails would be trivial for her." Queen Ariana then remained silent for a moment before saying to her royal guards, "Let them go," before facing Edenthiel and Natalia. "But under one condition. All you three come back alive. Now go." Ariana then struggled to restrain the feelings of her heart, before seeing the two leave and returning to her chamber. Buck then joined them, saying, "Well, I can't let my mission partner go by herself. Also, you're going to need this, Edenthiel." Buck then passed Edenthiel a spare energy shield generator and protective plating which barely fit around her slightly pudgy frame, and the lack of digitigrade legs, but served much better protection than her plain clothing. Edenthiel then huffed, moving her arms and legs around to get a better fit before Buck said, "You'll eventually get used to it. I thought Natalia's spare bodysuit would fit you better being a girl and all, but I guess I should have given you mine instead." Edenthiel then had an expression of determination. "It doesn't matter, so long as I get my husband back safe." "Then he's lucky to have you as his wife. Also, you're going to need this too." Buck then handed Edenthiel his sidearm and non-lethal blaster pistol, and some spare magazines. "Thanks, even though I don't know how to use these." "Well, Natalia and I will train you along the way." And so, Edenthiel, Buck, and Natalia left to save Jeremiah from those who kept him prisoner. Did you know this? The ancient Celanese devotion. This is an example of an invernate universe translation of the Jesus Prayer into the fictional language of Celanese. The only real difference is that Celanese has certain linguistic limitations, So a literal translation into English from Ceylonese is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the Lord of Lords, to me mercy a sinner. It is said this way because Ceylonese uses the same word/title for kings, lords, and members of the Veritok pantheon. So in order to differentiate the one true God from simple political rulers or idols, the term Lord of Lords is used. Meanwhile, Solsuren does make this distinction, hence why a Zolsuren translation of the Jesus Prayer can be done word for word without having to use any special phrasing. A reference to Monty Python's Life of Brian. The part about Paxsura leaving behind a spoon as her only asset to seize being a spoon was a reference to a scene in Monty Python's Life of Brian, where the Roman soldiers search a house and find nothing, so they search the house again and found a spoon and then leave. More references to kitsune folklore and foxes. In folklore, a kitsune's favorite food is fried tofu and favorite drink is sake. However, the diet of most actual foxes is omnivorous, eating almost anything that is edible, with rabbits and small animals being a staple. Hence, one of Victor's favorite foods is rabbit. Buck, apart from being a common name, is also a brand of cutlery, where I actually own a Buck 120 Bowie knife, with a brass and wooden grip, which I use to chop up vegetables, and carve meat because it's a large blade and makes it very easy to cut a bunch of vegetables at once.